want to build on something Tracy spoke about this morning, which is being comfortable with failure. But not just being comfortable and getting stuck there, not getting stuck in failure. And so starting from that, sort of challenging you to expand the definition of failure a little bit. We're not just talking that at one end of the spectrum of the crushing defeat of a campaign that didn't end up how you wanted and failed to meet all your goals, but talking about it as a spectrum of, was there something in this campaign we could have done differently? Could we improve upon this? Can we grow upon this? And being comfortable with that. And that sort of leads into another thing we're talking about is testing. And Brady talked about some very good, very practical tests. You know, do we want to have graphics in our e-blasts? What type of sign-up form do we want to have? And yes, we do that type of very practical testing, but I'd also sort of encourage you to broaden your definition there too and think about testing as a sort of philosophical state of being in digital, that we are, we're constant. Digital is a state of testing. It is a state of thinking, how can we do this better? How can we iterate on what we have and build on that? So we're going to talk about just a sort of brief case study of somewhere where we felt we were moving into the failure spectrum and how we reacted to that. And that not so much as an example of like how you could apply this exactly to a campaign you're doing, but just to illustrate a sort of state of being of nimbleness that we think is required to mature in digital.
Hey guys, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our Second Chance holiday campaign. I'm sure everyone in here can relate to the holiday giving season where a huge amount of donations come in. Our Second Chance campaign is focused around a specific animal and a really amazing story. This is Max. He was shot and left for dead. His leg was completely shattered. Luckily, a citizen found him and brought him into one of our SPCAs, and we were able to save him and rehome him. So it's really about taking that one story. I think we've talked about this, making that story that connection. So the work that we do is so much bigger, but making that one story people can connect to. It's an integrated direct mail, so we put out a direct mail piece. We have social media that's all coordinated, emails weekly for the last 6 weeks of the year, and we also, through Leah Bay here, our wonderful introduction through Stratcom, we're experimenting with SMS, which is kind of developing newly in Canada because of rule changes on data. So we were able to reach people on a lot of different formats, but despite that, we didn't do so great this year. Well, we weren't, I should say, we recovered. So I think most people, 31% is how much we bring in those last 6 weeks of the year, which is, I think, a very, very, for online giving, I should say. And that's pretty typical for an organization. We see that those last 6 weeks are so crucial, and there's so much pressure, and everyone's exhausted, and you really have to find a way to get that energy and be nimble. So where did it go wrong? So in the story about Max was just 1 week, and then we have to come up with another story in the next week and another story in the next week. So we had a big problem with not having enough content. The stories that we were sending out were stagnant. The people had heard about them before. They had been like medical emergencies that we'd had. So those are animals that had a major need for surgery, so they'd gone out in an email appeal. But since we'd already developed those stories, we wanted to reframe them in the end of year giving, like, remember this animal? But there wasn't a new trigger for them. It wasn't a new story. So, and in this kind of digital age where everyone needs constantly new content, thank you, BuzzFeed, we were really struggling. It was the same messaging. This is our 4th year of Second Chance, so it was really kind of this, we used the templates from the year before. I think everyone can relate to the fact that everyone works a lot of hours in nonprofit. So those familiar stories, not enough new assets. We didn't invest throughout the year in those new assets. we were really leery about overwhelming inboxes. I think everyone has that fear, especially in communication side, where you're going to exhaust people with emails. Don't be afraid. So we had Just for Giving Tuesday. I don't know if everybody has seen a major giving change in Giving Tuesday. So people waiting to give for Giving Tuesday and then not giving after. So really making sure that we're capitalizing on that. And we really because we kept the same messaging, we didn't let the donors define their path. We kept it all about holiday and happy and good. And in this wonderful political era, anger is what really drives people, and we were taking that kind of trigger away by just making it kind of this warm, fuzzy feeling. So we really needed to get back to why people are giving and let them decide about how they wanted to give instead of how we wanted them to give.
So I guess first step in spotting that things are going wrong is having some sort of diagnostic tools. And that's more of a diagnostic tool than, oh no, we're raising less than we had this time last year. And so for those that don't use the MSR benchmarks report, I encourage you to download that. It's a great resource that allows you to get a sense of how your organization is performing against other North American charities, but also it brings a good discipline of knowing what those measurements are for your charity. And bonus, if you sign up to participate in the study, you may spend some time at the front end getting them your data, but then they give you a really nice PowerPoint that has your organization's data compared to North American industry benchmarks. So I would encourage you to do that. They need more Canadian participants. So we had a really good sense of what we, not only that we were down in money, but sort of some areas where we could look for. So, whether our e-blasts whether people were converting from our e-blasts, whether our click-throughs from social were down. And so it's really important to have that sort of diagnostic tool to help you identify where you're going off the rails. And so the next part, once we had used that, is saying, well, what was working throughout the year? And Charly had mentioned medical emergency, which are these micro-campaigns. This animal, Fluffy, has extraordinary vet bills of $5,000. Will you help this animal, Fluffy? So that brings in for us a lot of new donors digitally. And so this is how they were giving all year. And then we were switching to this holiday second chance, more feel-good campaign, and it wasn't playing into their triggers. So we looked at, okay, that was what was working. We needed to build upon that. Secondly, we looked at the fact that we had a very narrow definition of what our holiday campaign was. We were saying, well, gifts on this form is our holiday campaign, but not gifts over here. And we just had to broaden that, and that sounds ridiculous that we had to have that realization. Part of that comes from having operated on multiple platforms, and they'd come from different places, and we were treating them separately. But we had to have that moment of saying, no, we have to count everything that's coming in, and if people are choosing to give in medical emergency, or they're choosing to give in another emergency appeal, or they're choosing to give in second chance, that's our holiday appeal, and we have to start speaking to them through what appeals to them, and give them those opportunities to give. Then we also needed to look at what other opportunities we had. So we knew we had a couple of media stories coming up. We had some cruelty cases. We had an announcement of charges that were coming up. So we knew that there were going to be some times where we were going to be in the news and we could leverage that. And so working with communications to get really high engagement in social media throughout the rest of our editorial calendar, so that we could, when we knew this news story was coming up, so that we could time fundraising asks to work with that and leverage what we were getting. And then, as Charly alluded to, increased frequency. We had had a pattern for 4 years of sending out an e-blast a week until the last week, then there'd be a couple more reminders, and we had to get comfortable with maybe increasing our unsubscribes, maybe annoying some people, and increasing that, increasing the frequency that we were emailing out.
Shoni said something that really got to me earlier, the word she said, if you're not annoying people, you're not doing enough. So, yeah.
Sometimes we annoy people. They get a little angry at us. That's okay. More give. So this was sort of week 3 of our campaign where we were falling behind. We weren't seeing the type of click-throughs and conversions that we'd seen in past years, and we had to do this rethink. During that period of time, in those last 6 weeks, we had previously sent about 11 e-blasts out, and this past year we went up to 18. I think we increased our unsubscribes by something like 12. So it really didn't have a significant impact on losing people, but it did have a significant impact on revenue. So we got 3 weeks in, it was going a little sideways, we made these changes. I think the most important thing to come out of that sort of being comfortable with failure, being comfortable with changing your plans, and being comfortable with viewing what you're doing as a constant state of testing is looking at what you can learn from, what you can learn going forward. And so out of sort of that campaign, we had a lot of discomfort internally with the frequency of the emails that we'd up. So we got asked these questions. Are you turning people off? Is the rest of the organization going to suffer because you pushed out a ton more emails at the end of the year because you wanted to make your goals? So that led to a sort of audit of what our subscription practices were, which led to some big questions around list management and what was a good list, and was it better to have active subscribers? Did we want a large list, or did we want a smaller list of active subscribers? It led to a conversation about looking at our subscription management to allow people to be a lot more nuanced in how they communicated what they wanted from us. It brought the idea of list building much more from just a fundraising priority to an organizational priority. And so by being in that sort of constant testing and constant bringing things forward and then evaluating at the end, we were able to sort of get some sort of big picture strategic changes which help us be stronger at the subsequent campaigns. Also taught us a great lesson in asset banking. That it's not enough throughout the year just to be taking the 2 pictures or the 3 videos that we need right now, but we need to be storing a whole pile of new stuff for the end of the year. We can come back to old stories as long as we offer new content, as long as we offer that was remember them then, look at them now type approach to it, but we can't do that unless we have a lot of assets banked. And then thirdly, we talked about how we are trying to move people from how they'd come into us to giving in another way. And just a realization that we had to be far more strategic when we're planning our campaigns around segmenting and giving people the opportunity to give with the area that interested them most. And none of these are huge realizations, and they'd all be in some sort of 101 list of what you should do. We learned things that were new or revolutionary is just getting to that point of feeling comfortable saying, we're failing right now, we have to try something different. Getting comfortable to the point of saying, we can't plan our digital campaign out in July for the end of the year. We have to be it has to be sort of last minute and responsive and what worked last week and change it for this week. And that sort of comfort with change and comfort with failure and comfort with the idea that you're constantly testing and always saying, what can we do better, is something that philosophically has to go not just in building the campaign, but in how you're hiring and how you're planning and how you're budgeting. And so for us, I think this campaign was just a good reminder of the mindset we need to mature in digital. I have no idea how we're doing for time. We were gonna, I don't know whether we started late or early, or do we have a... We're good, okay. So we wanted to take questions if people have any questions about what we've found or how we apply this approach.
Love what you're saying about being comfortable to fail. How do you get to that point when you feel like somebody's life might be on the line?
So the question is, how do you get comfortable with failure when, as we're all working for really important causes and what's on the line is really significant? And I think the key is being comfortable with failure but not getting stuck in failure. It becomes a problem if you're like, yeah, we're down this year, and we're just going to keep watching this for the remaining 3 weeks of the year and continue to be down. It's not a problem if you're like, we're down this year, we have to blow everything up and do something completely new for us. And I think that always being willing to try something new, because there is a lot of important stuff on the line.
Yeah, I think, oh, does this one not work? Okay. I think it's about seeing the opportunity in failure. So when you fail, as we were failing through this campaign, we're like, but we've done so well throughout the year, so we know there's opportunity. So it was just seeing that, okay, well, this isn't working, but something else will, and knowing that it will, because we're all super passionate people, which is why we do what we do. Any other questions? So we had a team meeting where we were like, ooh, money's down, what can we do? And we really talked about, well, what has triggered giving throughout the year? And we really sat down as a team to really go over the numbers, where are numbers up elsewhere, and really analyzing that and seeing how can we maximize those and make sure that we can make more money for this. Do you want to add to that?
I think, and the frequency part was another thing of we're going to have to try some new things, and we're going to have to throw out a couple of things and see what works. And so that meant that we added in a whole pile more e-blasts that we hadn't been doing. And for us, that was sort of testing frequency as well. We also could have done that by segmenting audiences and done some ABC testing and figured out which one to go out with, which we have done as well, as we'll try something new and send it out to 10% of our list in the morning and figure out which is performing best, and then send the better one out to the rest of the list later on in the day. Steve? So the question was asked to elaborate on the A/B testing and e-blasts, and yeah, we will, not as much as we would like to, because it's a resource issue, but we will test, if we have two different approaches to e-blast, we will do two versions and then send out the one that converts better.
So it's, oh God, I keep thinking that works. So we'll take 5% of the list and we'll A/B test to each 5%, and then come back to it a few hours later and send it out the same day, because we don't want to skew the results too much. So we don't, it can be you have to be really delicate between like, oh, was it performing better because it's the afternoon or the morning, or so we try not to wait too long and take the best results. But generally that's testing email subject lines, which can be really huge, as we all know, or content, or just the animal, or where the picture is in the email, as we saw earlier, that all those little details really matter.
Prioritizing is always a challenge. So the question is, when you have limited resources and there's a lot of things you could do to make things better. I mean, it's not always a perfect example, but I know we had a list of sort of 7 development things we wanted to do this year that are listed up on my whiteboard based on how much revenue I think they'll bring in, and that's. We jokingly say we leave a lot of good work undone, and I think everyone in the room can probably relate to that. It sounds like we do a lot of testing, and we're willing to change things, but you have to, as well as getting comfortable with failure, you have to get comfortable with the fact that this is not going to be as good as it could be if it was the only thing you could focus on. And that's not very helpful. That's more like inspirational slogan to put on your fridge, but I think just being comfortable with that, and the fact that there's a ton of testing in direct mail and not so much online, that sometimes ugly and not quite perfect performs better as a fundraising tool than absolutely perfect and looking like it's been marketed to death. So sometimes we do ugly, and that works. One more, last question.
The question is about asset banking, and not so much how are you getting the stories. You feel like you're getting enough stories, but then how to keep them organized and use them accordingly. We really struggled with getting assets, so getting those specific stories. So that is something, with our calendar contest, all the animals that we used in today is something that were actually submitted by people, so getting those assets and getting those stories delivered to us. So that's a big part of it. But if you guys have that solved, then keeping those stories, I personally bank them by month. So I go, well, this story talks about the holidays, so I'm definitely going to put it in there. This one's imagery has spring in it, so I'm going to put it here. And then I know I have stories banked by time of year, and that is how I personally do it. But I think you could do it in lots of different ways. But it's, you definitely want to keep those files really organized about when you last used them, because you want to make sure so everything's tagged accordingly to who's used it, who it went to, so you're not repeating the same stories.